In today's episode, Aimee, Raupp, and I unpack the science of epigenetics. In case you have not heard of Aimee, she is a renowned women's health and wellness expert and the best-selling author of the books Chill Out and Get Healthy, Yes, You Can Get Pregnant, and Body Belief. A licensed acupuncturist and herbalist in private practice in New York, she holds a Master of Science degree in traditional Oriental medicine. After implementing the philosophies in her Body Belief book myself and experiencing incredible results, I wanted to have this expert share with you the science that acts as a foundation to her book. Please join me in welcoming Aimee Raupp. So I wanted to interview you because I was at a funeral of the reproductive endocrinologist that helped me get pregnant, Dr. Braverman. It was a very sad day, but a lot of the patients went, and I met one of your former patients who had shared with me the Body Belief book as well as the diet that she did. And apparently it made such a transformation with her that even Dr. Braverman, I think, brought you in to start working with his patients, and I was sold. So I think a month after his funeral, I started using the things you discuss in Body Belief, and I even found a transformation with me. So I said, okay, if I'm here trying to educate women on how to be empowered with their own health, I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to talk to you so you can share all the wonderful things that are in your Body Belief book. And I know today we're going to focus on epigenetics. So maybe we could start with explaining what the science of epigenetics is for someone who may not understand what that is.
You know, it's been around for probably, or the conversation of epigenetics has been around, I guess I'd say about 15 years. So when I wrote my very first book, which came out in 2010, called Chill Out and Get Healthy. It's the first time I had that conversation about epigenetics, which basically means what we once thought about our genes being set in stone is not true. And so just because we might have a genetic predisposition to a disease or a manifestation of something in our health doesn't mean it has to actually show up. And I was a research scientist before I became an acupuncturist, and I was at UCSD with plans to go to medical school there, and that was when they were mapping the genome. It was like the hot time, about 20 years ago when all this was really in the forefront, talking about genetics. And they thought, once we map this genome, that's it. We'll be able to cure every single disease. We'll know what you're going to get. And then that's when they kind of started to realize, oh gosh, actually, your genes don't actually determine what they would call the phenotypic expression, right? So the disease state actually physically manifesting itself. And so this conversation of epigenetics started to come up, where it's basically how you live your life determines whether these genes turn on or turn off. And that's what actually causes this genetic manifestation. So you might have a predisposition towards, say, breast cancer or endometriosis or diabetes, but the choices you make, so the lifestyle choices you make, and it basically what they boiled it down to was sleep, stress, and nutrition. Those three things can impact whether these genes turn on or turn off. So again, you could pass on these genes, of course. So the same thing would happen in your offspring, right? But that it's not a guarantee, where we used to think it was an absolute guarantee. Mom has heart disease, you're definitely going to have it. You know what I mean? And that's just not the case. We're not seeing that clinically. There's only 5% of diseases are actually heritable, and the rest are all basically epigenetic influences. And what fascinated me the most about it was that's very much in line with Chinese medicine, right? So I'm a practitioner, I'm an acupuncturist by trade, but that means I have a master's of science degree in traditional Chinese or Oriental medicine. They're interchangeable. And we've been talking about this same idea for thousands of years, that it's how you live your life that determines your health, not your genetics that determine your health. And, that we would say if you live in accordance with the Tao, so you're living in accordance with, you're eating with the seasons, and you're getting enough rest, and you're expressing all of your emotions, and, in a in a healthy manner, that you will age appropriately and you will be free of illness. And so this is very much in line with what than Western research started to show when we thought, oh, we could map this genome and that's it, we'd solve everything. And that's actually not the case, because the genes are much smarter than that. It's not that simple, basically. And so there's all these environmental influences. So that could be the toxins in our environment. That could be stress levels. That could be poor sleep. That could be not enough exercise, not enough, nutrition, unhealthy relationships, trauma from childhood is a big indicator of genes turning on and turning off. There's a big epigenetic influence that happens with significant trauma. And so that's what the research is now, and this is very much in the know at this point, because we're, like I was saying, it's about 15 years that this conversation's been going on, maybe 12, but I think about 15. And, now we're all seeing that it's really has a lot more to do with lifestyle than anything else. So again, the predisposition might be there, but it doesn't mean that that's your destiny.
And when you talk about turning it on or off, like, is it like you literally could just can you explain a little bit about turning it off and on, and how like the sleep and stress and nutrition can impact that? So like, as an example, to be overly simplistic, like, can you get better if you start getting more sleep, and does it actually transition to more positive? And then if you start not sleeping again, you could probably have some more negative impacts. Like, is it as simple as that? And I guess, how perfect do you have to be with controlling these things?
I think the level of perfection, which I think was with an asterisk of like, we all should just do the best we can do. But
yes,
I think is based upon the, if you will, how strong the predisposition is, right? So some people have a little more leeway than others, I think is a good way to look at it. But yes, the best thing about, this epigenetic conversation is that it's shiftable. So you could have been headed in like the not so healthy direction for the last 10 years, and you can turn it around. I think the best way to look at it is how we talk about, you can heal from heart disease. You can reverse your diabetes, right? People recover from cancer, right? There's these things like people manage their MS without medication, right? Or their autoimmune conditions, people get off their meds, they get better, which doesn't make sense if it was purely what we thought, that like, okay, these are your genes, you're going to get rheumatoid arthritis, and this is it. Your only option is, Humira or whatever it is. Like, that's it, black and white. We're not seeing that, because what we see is, okay, so here's this rheumatoid arthritis patient or, psoriatic arthritis patient who's been very sick their whole life. I have a case that I'm thinking of, for instance, in my clinic right now. She was diagnosed at a young age. Well, they misdiagnosed, of course, for a while, and she suffered greatly for many years until they figured out the diagnosis. She could barely walk. She was in so much pain. She was covered in psoriasis, and her joints had the psoriatic arthritis. And now at the age of 40 something, she's basically off all her steroids. She takes her Humira at a lesser frequency, and it all and she can exercise now. She has no psoriasis anywhere on her body. That doesn't seem to make sense if we were just purely, this was a genetic predisposition. But what she's done over the years is started getting into acupuncture, right? She changed her diet. She changed her lifestyle. She's worked on the emotional trauma that was significant in her childhood from having this disease. So that's a perfect example of, yes, this is reversible. And it's basically like, I guess to keep it in layman's terms, almost like oxidation in the body. So there's, and I liken oxidation, I think in my books, to like rusting, things can just, age before their time if they're not properly taken care of. But then when, maybe you can't really undo the rust in a car. So maybe that's not the best analogy, but then maybe a plant is a better analogy. But then you could go in and you could change the soil and you could give this plant another life, even though 90% of it is dead, right? So you're going in and you're changing the external environment, the nourishment for those cells to then shift and thrive into something else. Because it is also another thing we know now is that cellularly we turn over our cells I believe it's about every 90 days, that cellularly. So we're different now on a cellular level than we were 2 years ago, or even 3 months ago in our body. And so the same thing is happening where your body is continuously getting that opportunity to either express itself or not with this disease state.
And so I guess one question I would have then is how would someone know about their potential predisposition? I know in the book you talked about various testing that could be done. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that because I know this is the age of tracking and testing everything.
Yeah. I think I'll use the 23andMe data if people still feel safe using their data, knowing that they're potentially selling your information. But you can use an alias and an alias email if you want. I think that's the cheapest and most efficient way to do it. And then you can run it through other systems besides 23andMe. I'll use Pure Genomics, which is by Pure Encapsulations, which gives a nice printout. There's much deeper ones. You can just do a quick search on how to read my genetics. And there's ones you pay for that'll give you hundreds, if not thousands of potential SNPs, they call them, single nucleotide polymorphisms that you have. And that tells you your predisposition. I've run mine through one of those, and it's a bit overwhelming. I mean, there's like 100 different cancers I could potentially get. Some of them are so benign, in the term of cancer. But I don't know that we want to know all that information, but we can. And, but I think generally speaking that we find, as my child is screaming in the background, I apologize. I don't know if you can hear that.
Okay.
It's a little distracting. We find that, there's just a general kind of, if you will, anti-inflammatory diet that's low toxins. That seems to be the fix-all for most things, So why, in my opinion, why go too deep into that pile? It's not super comforting. I think it can be a little fear-inducing. You can even do it now, with children, or even when, women are first getting pregnant. There's much more advanced genetics that you can do now and know if your child is going to have asthma or diabetes or a predisposition to that. I tend to think that can set us up for a little too much anxiety and worry. So I don't usually recommend it, but I do like to do, like I said, the Pure Genomics report with my clients because it gives me some basics. There's, the book Dirty Genes by Ben Lynch. He goes over, I think it's the top 8 or 10 SNPs, the SNPs, that are going to be the most influential, negatively or positively, in our lives. So why don't we just manage those, and the rest will kind of take care of itself. But yeah, so you can get your data, and then there's also, other places that use a bit of a different technology than how the 23andMe does it. It's a little bit more expensive, and but there are doctors out there, a lot of those. Some functional medicine doctors, but also like the cutting edge, I guess you would call them, like anti-aging doctors that can do these reports for you as well. Sometimes I think it can be an information overload, so it really just depends on the person. I think it's useful to just adopt the healthy lifestyle. And we know for certain that since the 1980s, we've introduced, I think, close to 100,000 chemicals in our environment. And we know for certain that those chemicals are triggering immune responses and inflammatory responses in our body. And so even if you just committed to a less toxic lifestyle, you would cut your predisposition to these diseases significantly, right? So the phenotypic expression or the actual physical manifestation of the disease wouldn't likely not show up. But you'd still be able to pass it on. So it still has to be this thing where you're educating your children and you're talking to them about, one thing I discovered when I ran my genetics through that very high tech one was that I'm a carrier for the advanced prostate cancer, which was actually gave me a lot of peace because my dad died at 63 from stage 4 prostate cancer, a very healthy guy. He was, healthy in all the terms and happy and did all the right things, if you will. And it was very confusing to me, knowing all that I know, that I didn't understand why he got such an aggressive cancer, and it got him so quickly, if you will. And once I ran the genetics and I saw that I was a carrier, it actually gave me a lot of peace, because that's one of those things that, he just had the predisposition. For all I know, he had 2 copies of the genes, which makes it harder to fight that lifestyle, fight with the lifestyle, if you will. And we just, so sometimes there's, I think, it helps you solve for problems too. But now I know that. And so now I can address that with my son, right? Like, okay, so at some point we'll do his genetics and we'll see. Maybe I passed it on to him, maybe I didn't. And if I did, there's going to be certain things I'll put in place and make sure he follows for the rest of his life to prevent the manifestation of that disease, right? Or you prophylactically, do you go and get your prostate removed? Maybe. Do you know what I mean? It's just like the women with the, I'm forgetting the actual gene, but
the BRCA.
Yeah, it's the same thing of is that the best course of action? For some people, it might be. But again, that's where the genetics is showing us. And then so you'd still, though, have to do those lifestyle to, because in Chinese medicine, we'll say, well, the cancer will just find another place. Like that's kind of how we think. It's just like you still have to support your body in this way to prevent the illness from truly manifesting. And perhaps you could and not have to get the organs removed, but for some people, that's the measure that feels the most comfortable.
Right.
But still, I'm sure all those women, that we know of that went and did the, if you will, prophylactic surgeries, they still follow a really healthy lifestyle, and are trying to avoid anything that could be, provoking to disrupt their estrogen in their body,
Right. No, absolutely. It's funny when you were talking about the rheumatoid arthritis patient, I was thinking about my own path in being highly educated now on a lot of these things. And honestly, I'm still learning. Where I come from, the pharmaceutical industry, actually. And, it's the way I've always thought was you have an illness, you take a pill. And through my own fertility journey, I've come to learn so much about health. And I know I've removed toxins. I actually, right before I moved, I tossed all of my the ladles and whatnot. And I bought everything's metal, stainless steel now. So like all those things have been tossed. And I guess I just think about like traditionally most people do go to an MD and their training is also very traditional. Like you have an illness, you take a pill. And there's actually a book, I'm forgetting it's called How Healing Works. I'm forgetting the name of the author, but he talked about how when you have chronic conditions, the training for that is not necessarily there in medicine. It's really more about like if you have this specific thing, here's a specific thing we can do. But then once it hits chronic, it is a game changer as far as how treatment works. So how does someone who is struggling with something, like what do you recommend as a path for finding these answers? Because I know even for me, it's been a 10-year journey and I'm still learning. So like trying to figure out all the information you need to know when it's not in one place, which by the way, Fempower Health is trying to put it all in one place. It's really hard and it takes a lot of time. And meanwhile, people are suffering. So what would you say are like some key things people can do in the path to get there, especially if they're getting resistance from the clinicians that they're currently seeing?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think about finding a doctor that does support you and finding more answers, like a Dr. Braverman, right? He was I would call him a mad scientist, and a detective, which is what I am, I just basically a detective. Like I just keep looking until we figure it out. It depends on what the person is looking to fix, if you will, based on what tests to get done. But I tend to see functional doctors be the right route for people to go. And those are medical doctors who went and did additional functional medicine training. And so they're going to do really extensive, nutrient panels on you, and they're going to do extensive thyroid panels on you, and they're going to look for inflammatory markers and like your omega-3 to 6 ratios. And, and obviously if you're dealing with fertility challenges and there's an autoimmune condition, guys like Braverman or Vidali is now covering, his Dr. Scher, Dr. Beers. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there, Kofinas, Dr. Kwak Kim, I think they're phenomenal doctors. There's not a ton of them, in the US especially, that will go and do this, these autoimmune panels, if you will. And when it comes to fertility, I think it's a little deeper. They're looking at how you and your partner are mixing as well, and if there's any antibodies that are being created in the body. But a good endocrinologist could also do a lot of this testing for you if they're, if they know what they're looking for. So you want to be looking at like the complete thyroid panel and clotting factors and, someone who's paying attention to the MTHFR, someone who's looking at your vitamin D. So, but there are docs out there. And I go over that in Body Belief as well. And I know you'll have good resources for your people. What I tend to see clinically is it's doctors who have done additional training, doctors who are very aware of how nutrition is impacting our life and our health. If your doctor knows nothing about nutrition, I think it's the wrong doctor. And, that's that. But I also say that with a caveat, like you might still need a really good endocrinologist if you have psoriatic arthritis and because they need to prescribe your Humira, but then you also might need a functional medicine doctor to work with in conjunction, right? So you just have to formulate your team. And some people, like I say this to my girls all the time that are dealing with fertility stuff, like sometimes your fertility doctor just needs to be the guy that's going to collect those eggs and make the embryos and do the transfer, or the girl. And then you have this other team, like, and I'm on that team, and you have your functional doc and you have Dr. Braverman on that team. And we all everybody has their part to play. So you sometimes you have to compartmentalize just the way our system is set up. And sometimes it's a one-stop shop where you have one doctor and they can really cover all the bases, but it's really about detective work. And there are testing out there. I mean, there is, there's like Cyrex Labs has a ton of really good tests that you can use. Vibrant America is one that I've been looking into and working with. And same thing, they have really good like immunopanels and nutrient panels. And so we can just start to look at the blood work. And then also like what I do is I look at the genetics too, and a lot of them do. And you sit with both of those things, and then you figure out, okay, this is what we can do to help best support your body. So it properly detoxifies, so it properly methylates, and it does all these things that will, regardless of your genetics and the predisposition, will best support you so that you stay as healthy as possible.
So let's talk about, because I will have to say, even though through my journey I've tried a million different diets, it wasn't until I read Body Belief and went through the diet protocol that you outlined in the book that I finally was able to internalize, like, this is no joke about food and your health. Within a week, my anxiety disappeared to the point where I said to myself, hold on a minute. So I live at this baseline that I've been living with for so many years. I could have been my whole life. And by following the diet, I was so calm that I didn't realize I was living at this baseline that I thought was normal.
Right.
And then my skin on my arms, I get, it's keratosis pilaris, right? Is the pronunciation, and gone. And so it was just really interesting to see. Of course, my cholesterol went up, and I think I emailed you that the metrics haven't caught up. It was really funny. I had my physical a couple weeks into the diet, and but I will say it was a hard diet. And so I'd love to talk to you about, maybe you could just outline some of the philosophies of nutrition and then the long-term pieces of it. Because I have my own takeaways of what I've done, but I'd love to hear from you as the expert around how someone can consider the nutrition piece of this to maintain as healthy of a lifestyle as possible.
Well, I think the first, I guess maybe belief is what I want to say that has to come through is that food is medicine, and food should be the primary medicine. So the first thing we do, even from a Chinese medicine perspective, how I was trained after my Western medical training, but is the first line of defense is food. And to understand that basically if you're eating things that your body can't break down or digest or absorb, or you're maybe, allergic is the wrong word, intolerant to, that your body is not getting everything it needs and it's functioning, it's subpar. It's just subpar. And, talk about that in Body Belief, that I think majority of people are walking around at like 60 to 70% their wellness, and it's just like with you, and that's okay. You know what I mean? It is what it is. You've learned to accept it. Like, I have anxiety. I'm just an anxious person. That's just who I am. And yeah, what I've seen clinically is what you experience personally. I usually joke 90% of my anxiety cases are either blood sugar issues or food intolerances. It's not really anxiety. It's something that you're ingesting every single day that is triggering a response in your body. And it's literally like, oh my God, it's making me buzz. You know what I mean? Just like certain people have like, oh, I can't touch caffeine. I just can't touch it. Okay, so guess what? That is actually it's a chemical reaction in your body. That's what's happening. So to start to first realize that food is medicine. And I think for some people that's really easy. And for others, that's a big leap, because, well, my grandmother, she ate McDonald's and smoked cigarettes and she lived till she was 97. Awesome. So my takeaway from that is, okay, you have some strong genes. That's great. It's still not what I would recommend to anybody, but okay, who knows? She also probably grew up on a farm eating, the cattle that was slayed in her backyard fresh and drinking the milk from the cow. So she got different groundwork than you did. So the first thing is to understand food is medicine. And then the second thing is to really, if you want to, understand what we've done to our food sources over the last, 40 years at this point, and the amount of pesticides and chemicals, and just looking at those alone, the chemical reactions they're causing in your body. And so, to me, it's so much, and you read Body Beliefs, so and I say this in the beginning of the book, I could give you the diet right now, and I could tell you how much to sleep and when to meditate and all these things and what supplements to take. But I don't think that serves you. What serves you first is I want you to start to understand why you're not nourishing your body with the things that help you feel good. Why are you not in touch enough to realize like, oh, when I do that, this happens. And so can we start to connect the dots first and start to realize how worthy you are of proper nourishment, mentally and physically and nutritionally and emotionally and spiritually. I do all that in the book first to really warm people up and get them to understand, that even if maybe the changes are just that you're going to go organic and grass fed and eat really good quality food and detoxify the house of bath and beauty products, that alone probably makes a huge difference, right? And cut out soy, cut out corn, cut out all the processed, the GMO foods. You'd probably see most people would just dramatically shift. But then to take it one step further and to really, we can't promise cure of types of like autoimmune conditions, especially, but we can heal, we can start to heal. That's where you have to get very specific with food. So things we know for sure, wheat, in this country has been highly, what's the word? I want to say, I guess manufactured is a good word. Adulterated is another good word. And it seems to be causing chemical reactions in our body. People might not have celiac, but they might have a gluten intolerance. And most people are actually reacting to the pesticide, not the actual wheat. And that's something that I think I'm one of those people. I think I have a pesticide reaction, not a wheat reaction, and that's something I figured out over the years. So wheat, soy, corn, those are our three most engineered products in the United States, and they seem to be causing the most harm and challenges. Then start to looking at things of like, is it normal to eat 4 handfuls of almonds a day? Did we do that in the past? Like, were they readily accessible? Where are those on? What are they treated with? Are raw better than sprouted? So then we start looking at like beans and nuts and grains, and what we see in the research and clinically for certain is that a lot of these foods are highly inflammatory and they're causing these inflammatory reactions. Some would go as far as, leaky gut is, another common term used in this world where there's an immune reaction, and particles of the food actually split. The gut is supposed to be completely sealed off. It causes the gut to start to open up, becomes more porous, and food particles get into the bloodstream. That then causes an immune response. And every time you eat that, it causes this immune response, right? So in order to heal the gut and lower inflammation, we need to remove these highly inflammatory foods that are causing this porousness. And so the diet that I have in Body Belief that I've seen be the most clinically effective is basically an autoimmune paleo diet with a good amount of bone broth, which that ties in with Chinese medicine as well. We've been using bone broth to heal all diseases for thousands of years. It's not, it's not trendy for us. It's like legitimately we see anything that comes from bone is very healing to the jing or the essence of the body. Autoimmune paleo is a tough diet. You're basically eating, animal protein or fish protein, wild caught or grass fed. You're eating lots of cooked, not raw vegetables, and you're eating lots of good quality fats. You're not eating nightshades. You're not eating soy or corn or artificial sweeteners or nuts or beans or seeds, right? I mean, you've done it, you know it. You cut everything out. It's not to say that they have to be out of your body forever, but you do that to basically help heal the gut. That really lowers the inflammation. And then what I recommend in the book, and again, I did a ton of research too. There's not a single food allergy test out there that's accurate or precise that can give you exactly what you need to do for you to heal, because they're testing you while you're still either exposed to the food, or it's not as accurate as an elimination diet can be. So there's a lot of people that'll come back and be like, but I tested and I don't have a celiac, or I don't have a dairy issue. I still would, if you're still dealing with symptoms or very curious and looking to fix something that hasn't otherwise been quote unquote fixed, then elimination diet is what you need to do. And then you slowly reintroduce foods and you just note your symptoms. Like for you, your red flags would be like, okay, is the skin thing coming back? That's my red flag, is my eczema too. And so the lectins are in the nuts and the beans, and typically some grains, which are basically, I think Dr. Gundry says it best in his book, Plant Paradox. Lectins make food really hard to digest, so they can like tolerate the weather outside and the seasons and all the extreme environments. And so when we ingest these things, very hard for us to break down, and typically either build up in our system, which will then cause this kind of inflammatory or immune reaction, or we just can't digest it and we just don't get any nutrition from it. And we wind up, even though people are like, oh, I eat so clean, but they're super nutrient deficient because they actually can't absorb or break down their food.
Thank you for sharing that explanation of the elimination diet. And it is interesting, like, I don't know if it's helpful for the audience to hear examples. Like another interesting learning I had in my own experience is that, and I think a reminder is the intolerance to the food doesn't necessarily show up right away. So one fascinating thing for me is if I drink wine, 3 days later, I'm like just acting really off. And then I'm like, oh my God, it was the wine, because I was really clean and I could notice everything. And so I think the other is it's not something right away. It sometimes can happen a few days later, which I thought was
and
interesting.
It's almost I always say to my girls, like the frequency and consistency is really what it is. So same with me, like I discovered almonds. Almonds were a big trigger for me. I had no idea. I was like full on paleo, ate a lot of nuts. I've never done well with beans, so they just were easy for me to just never touch. Like I have a hummus once in a while, I'm fine. But nuts, almonds in particular, were flaring up my eczema, and I didn't realize it. But I was eating way too many. You know, we just shouldn't be eating that many things of one thing, I suppose, is a good way to look at it. Although, I don't know, that I might contradict myself. But I guess foods of that nature, like not too many grains and not too many nuts or not too many seeds, you know, and even not too much flesh. You know, I still think flesh should be like 3 ounces the size of our palm, you know, a couple times a day. The rest of our plate really should be vegetables. And I do think a broth, because it's just so cooked down and so nutrient dense, and fats, and vegetables should be cooked in fats. It's the best way we can absorb all the nutrition. But the same thing for me was I realized the almonds were this trigger and I couldn't believe it. So same thing. I can have like a sprouted almond butter, I don't know, once or twice a week, perfectly fine. I go over that, eczema starts to come back. Same thing with like gluten. Like I've realized over these, I used to be 100% gluten-free. Now I have like homemade sourdough, has to be from organic, I typically make it myself. Same thing though. I can have like 2 servings of it. If I hit that 3rd serving, I'm constipated, and I'm going to be constipated for 2 days, 3 days, you know? But same thing, like I can have these little exposures and they don't cause these major flare-ups anymore, which is what I also think is like a big takeaway for so many people, is like, you follow this way of living, this diet, if you will, for a period of time. Some people it's 6 months, some people, like the girl you met at the funeral, it was 1.5 years on that diet. And I mean, she was ready to murder me, you know, because she still wasn't getting pregnant. Her fertility treatments were still not being successful. but her symptoms were getting better. Like she had just joint pain. She had like loose bowels. She would have these sinus issues, these headache things. And I'd get fixated on the symptoms. I'm like, the pregnancy is going to happen. That's to me as an aside. That's when the body's like, I got enough. I can do this now. And then she gets pregnant. After 8 years of trying, 20 some odd failed fertility treatments, she gets pregnant naturally at 42. I mean, Braverman literally said, like, what the F did you do? Like, I need to know. And he's like, and I don't have time to learn all this. So I'm just going to put you on the website and you're going to do the nutrition with the girls. Like, he was like, I don't have time. My brain can't fit it. But for her, it was this frequency and consistency. And you know what? The biggest thing that I pulled out of that diet was lentils. She was having properly cooked green lentils like every day. She loved them. And I was like, I think it's the lentils. I think it's the lectins, because her little annoying symptoms were not, and she still wasn't getting pregnant, which obviously was what she was coming to me for. Well, that might not be obvious to you guys, but when we pulled those lentils, things started to shift. Lentils and sesame seeds. And what's even more interesting, and you know this because you know Braverman's work. So once you get pregnant, he still does these immune panels, right, to see how the body's reacting, if he needs to adjust meds, things like that. So she got pregnant naturally, but I still recommended she worked with him because I just didn't want to lose the pregnancy after all that time and that work. She agreed. She needed more calcium because she was on steroids. And so usually I'll say, okay, have a spoonful of tahini every day because it's a really good source of calcium, instead of taking an extra calcium supplement she didn't feel like taking. She was like pregnant and not feeling good, all that. So she starts eating tahini, and we had cut seeds out. And she was loving the tahini because she was like, oh God, I missed it so much. And then the immune panel, he calls her up and he was like, whatever you are doing, stop. Something is triggering your immune system again. Now, mind you, she's on like 20 milligrams of prednisone a day. Like, you would think that would shut anything down. She started having a reaction to the tahini again. And it was so validating, I think, for all of us. Like, he even said to me, he goes, I really just never thought sesame seeds could do this much damage to a pregnancy. Do you know what I mean? And that's her case. That's not everybody's case, but it was so validating for all of us that this food was really triggering an immune response in her body to the point where it could have caused a miscarriage. We corrected it, and she has a 1-year-old now, and he's cute.
That is so amazing. Yeah, I remember. She was telling me that
she had just given birth, right? When
no, she was pregnant at the funeral. Yeah, and she told me that Braverman, that you had said when she got pregnant, call Braverman right now because I want to keep you pregnant. So yeah. So a couple things, just to, I guess, hone in on the diet and just around some conflicting information we are hearing around things we should do for our body. So one is plant-based diet. So, admittedly, like, I'm really trying to, be good for the environment, and you hear so much about meat and what it's doing to our environment. So, I really struggled because I'm like, should I start to transition to plant-based? Because every Saturday I go to the farmer's market. I have my chicken bone guy. I make my bone broth every Saturday night and make some soups out of it. But, I'm like, but shouldn't I be good for the environment? So there's this conflict of like, I've done this diet, it works. The bone broth is amazing. My hair stopped falling out by doing it. I also take the beef liver pills, and, but then a lot of people are being told you need to be plant-based. And then the other one when you mentioned the sesame seeds is there's the seed cycling that often helps women for like PCOS, et cetera. So like, if you're in these positions where these things are helping you, but then you hear these other things that can help you, like, how does someone figure this out? I mean, is it just as simple as working with someone, trying the different things and seeing how their body works?
Yeah, I think it's symptom-wise. Like, I think, and I do want to point out that I believe my diet is like 70% plant-based, and I still think that's really important, I still want 6 to 8 servings of vegetables a day in your diet. It's mainly plants that I want you eating. I do want them cooked in a fat. It just seems to help you absorb, and there's argument. I mean, I think that's the thing too, is we can find arguments on any side of the coin these days. It's, I tend to be very rooted in what I would call ancestral nutrition, just because maybe that's how I was taught, but I think clinically too, I've just never seen a super healthy vegetarian. I just don't see them. It's very hard to get all your B vitamins and your choline especially. and they typically are deficient in some way. And so even if I can get my vegetarians to do fish, and if they can't do fish, okay, can you do eggs, and can you do some fish broth, or even just the collagen peptides? I see a big difference. A lot of times, I mean, especially if I'm getting a girl coming to me trying to get pregnant, she, and I don't mean this in a way that I take advantage, but they are pretty much willing to do anything at that point. So even if I can get them to do eggs and take the liver pills and do some broth, we can get it done. We can get it done. You don't have to be eating meat or fish 2 to 3 times a day. I have vegetarian days for certain, but I think in general, we still need, Chinese medicine, we say if a woman gives up blood every month, she needs to eat blood. That's just how we look at it. And I just, I have 20 years of clinical experience at this point. I think it speaks for itself. Like, I just see better health outcomes in people who, I don't see it in, like, there's people who are like the carnivore diet. I don't think that's effective either. I think that's insane too, but like mainly vegetables and a little bit of good quality protein and fat. And you really should be the healthiest you can be. And so then I think going back to the environmental piece, I'd never once recommend eating anything commercially raised, right? So if that's fish, if that's meat, which that's where the impact is. If you're getting grass-fed from good quality farmers who are doing the right thing, the animals are actually helping the environment because they're part of the ecosystem, right? The cow needs to shit in the grass in order for like the everything to happen and the bugs to come in and the runoff, and like that is part of the ecosystem. So personally, I think we're doing right, but you really have to have good quality meat. And if you can't get good quality meat, then I typically am saying, then okay, then we're basically, you're going to take the liver pills and you're going to eat eggs, and that's all you're going to eat because we can't get it. Like, you can ask any of my girls, if you can't get the grass-fed bones, I don't want you making the bone broth. So I do think that's the differentiation. And there are no studies showing us, like more longitudinal studies showing us the difference of what grass-fed good quality meat does to us versus the commercially farmed. All of those, the China study and the forks over knives, they're all actually based on the China study, which is based on epidemiological studies, which is not at all based on grass-fed or quality meat. And it's actually all based on surveys, which is, not really the gold standard at all in research, which, all the scientists know that, but the media takes it a different way. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, you got to do what feels good for you. If you feel really guilty and horrible eating meat, then okay, maybe it's not for you, but we can find other ways to get around it. And going to like the seed question and things like that, I only really pull seeds when I see obvious autoimmune symptoms, right? So there are a lot of girls that don't have autoimmune issues. There's a lot of people that don't. There's a lot of people that do. So seed cycling, I still find really useful. I still recommend that they need to be sprouted organic seeds. They shouldn't be raw, and in moderation, So as again, with seed cycling, we're talking like a teaspoon a day. We're not talking like 4 handfuls, So I think it's that part too, that it's not just the food, it's how much of the food that we're consuming that is having the negative effects. And then the processing of the food. So are we meant to eat raw nuts? I don't think so, actually. If we look back traditionally, everybody soaked their nuts. Everybody soaked their beans. There was a little bit of vinegar so it would break down the skin, like that. It's traditional. If you go back to what traditions did, just the same thing with soy. Like miso can be so powerful when it's properly made, when it's properly consumed. Soy in soy milk or in like soy burgers is killing us, and maybe that's extreme, but I feel that way.
Okay. So that's really helpful perspective. And you're right. Like the Body Belief, the diet in there does definitely talk a lot about the vegetables. And I guess for me, the takeaway, just because maybe I make it so much, is the bone broth too. And by the way, thank you for introducing me to cultured ghee. I always have a stash in my home. So a question for you though about bone broth, because it is a really important and helpful food, so to speak. And I wanted to talk to you about cooking it, because I think you had also mentioned it in your book, and I've read a lot about how long one cooks it. So I think what would be helpful, because it is so nutrient dense and you've talked so much about, but it has to be the right kind of food. You can't just, because it's, a certain thing, you have to understand where it came from. So just because you're eating fish isn't good, what did it come from is important. So when it comes to bone broth, how long should it be cooked for? And for those who are thinking, oh, so you're saying bone broth is important, let me go get that carton at Trader Joe's. So I've certainly transitioned since reading your book, but I think it would be helpful just to educate everyone on it so that they know and they don't just go buy anything off the shelf.
Yeah, so I think the shelf-stable ones, unless it's frozen in the freezer section, meaning and liquid, of course it's liquid in those boxes, but I don't think you should consume it because typically then it's given some kind of preservative to make it shelf life stable. To me, also, if you are buying it, you want to know their process. How long are they cooking it for? Are they using chicken feet? Are they filtering their water? Do they use vinegar? The vinegar is really important in the cooking process because it helps break down the bones even more, helps things really get out. Chicken feet is really important in making good quality gelatin-rich bone broth because the feet have a lot of gelatin in there. They say typically a broth, 12 to 14 hours is what makes a broth. I think a stock is like 6 hours. Some people, the broth might be too fatty in the beginning. So like the GAPS diet, which is the gut and psychology syndrome diet, which is Natasha McBride? Natasha McBride. Looking on my bookshelf. Yeah, I think Natasha McBride. She'll start sometimes people with stocks versus broths because they're not as, they're a little more watery basically, so a little easier to digest. But the 12 to 14 hour cook seems to be kind of the window you want to really get everything to break down. And it's just a slow simmer. I do also use the Instant Pot, which is a pressure cooker and can get you to the same results, but only in 120 minutes. So there's some argument about that is it as gelatinous? I tend to get still a good gelatin with it. You'll know basically when it comes to room temperature and you get that kind of fat at the top, that thickness. It's like goopy. That's the gelatin. That's what you want. I call it baby glue for my girls trying to get pregnant. That's my term. I don't think anybody else has coined that one. But if I do buy it, I tend to only buy it from one website. It's bonebroth.com, or maybe they changed their website. But, I could get you the link. You could share it in the show notes because they cook it in filtered water and they use the vinegar and they cool it in the vats before they put it in their containers. That's the other thing, because the frozen stuff you're buying is in plastic. So are they putting that in hot? And then you're basically undoing all the good because now you got all that BPA. Even if it's BPA-free packaging, there's still a BPA-like component in there that's not good for us. So it's another thing to think about. So yeah, similar to you, my best bet is I make it at home. I have glass containers. I pour, separate it out in there, leave a little bit at the top so the glass container doesn't burst when it freezes. I let it cool, I freeze. The other thing people get concerned about is the histamine content. And so if you are a histamine reactor, which some of you probably know if you are, but if you get headaches or sinus issues, chances are you're a histamine reactor. And that's a lot of us. Your best bet is to not have any meat or animal product in the fridge, leftovers for, don't consume it after 2 days, basically, because the histamine content just goes higher and higher. So the best bet to do with your broth is smaller batches, freeze them all, and then thaw as you need. I thawed mine last night for today, and I consumed it all today. And so I'll do the same thing again tomorrow. So I try not to keep it in the fridge more than 2 days ever. And I don't really have a histamine thing. I just tend to see I do better that way. What else about broth? I think that's it. The recipe I like and the book that I think is just the bomb when it comes to this is Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon. The Weston A. Price organization has been talking about ancestral nutrition long before the word paleo was ever on the market. And they talk to you on how to make your own ferments and how to make your own breads. And you could even make your own baby formula if you couldn't produce breast milk. It's a Bible, not a cookbook. Someone said to me when they gave it to me like a decade ago. She also has a book called Know Your Fats. Another book that I love is Deep Nutrition. That book is well-researched. She's a PhD, Catherine Shanahan. She talks about, too, the importance of broth and good quality food and eating meat on the bones and cooking your vegetables. And she does more of like an overview of the research and the history of food and the making of food, very similar to Weston A. Price and their work, or Sally Fallon's work, where it's not so much like a diet, where this is legitimately a lifestyle. And then you can start to see that, animal products were just a side dish, that's like, you're not the main part of the meal. And broths, everything were cooked with these healing broths that just, I think, really do help keep the gut lining healthy. And you can get some decent vegetarian broths, but it's still not the same level. But have I had, I can successfully work with the vegetarians, again, like I said, if they're willing to do a couple things, I think then we can, just so we can get some of that, we need some of that gelatin in them. And the choline is so important too, especially for fertility, but really just for any hormone balance. Anybody who has hormones, which is all of us, need choline.
Right. No, thank you for sharing all of this helpful information. And I do think that understanding that food is medicine is such a foundation. And I know throughout my journey, I've gotten there too. I used to feel like it was a diet. And once it clicks, it is truly magical. And then you can make choices like, okay, I'm going to have wine. Okay, in 3 days, I'm going to be grumpy. So I probably don't want to do something where I need to be happy because the wine's going to impact me.
Scout and Cellar. Scout and Cellar wine is the only wine out there right now that actually tests for all the pesticides and for glyphosate, and no sugar added to the wines. They don't do any of the typical manufacturing for wines. And even I myself, I just don't have a reaction to wine anymore like I used to. And so I can have some of their wine.
Interesting. What was the name again?
It's called Scout and Cellar. You go to aimeeraupp.com/wine. I've linked to it. It's just easier.
Awesome.
It's mail order. So it delivers to your house, which is also kind of cool. And it's not that expensive at all, but they literally third-party test through UC Davis every single batch. So it's not even just like the vineyard gets tested once. Every batch that they buy from these vineyards is third-party tested for over 200 different pesticides, including glyphosate, which most people are really, and then there's very low in sulfites because there's nothing added. The sulfites are like this added to make it basically preserved. And there's no added sugar, which is typically what people are really reacting to. The pesticides and the added sugar.
Yeah.
So anyway, I have found wine that works, but there's
there's
one purveyor out there right now doing it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I brought it up then,
Yeah.
but thank you. And I, so just to summarize, again, food is medicine, and, epigenetics is really something that we can have an impact on. And maybe we can get into all the testing, maybe not, but as long as we understand the foundations around how we eat, our stress levels, sleep, and the environment, and even some of the things that we're dealing with mentally that we may have not figured out how to work through, I think are important in creating a holistic, healthier self. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that takeaway for people because we've had so many great discussions here?
No, I mean, I think that's really it. It's just, I think the greater question too is how am I nourishing myself, and how am I making choices that support the goals I'm looking to achieve? I think that's a big question to ask ourselves with all of our choices, from our relationships to our work choices to our home life. How does this nourish and support me? And how is it helping me move the ball forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it may seem hard, and I know some have said it can feel isolating, but I won't speak for you, but for me at least, it's made me take care of myself better. And maybe the way I used to live is different. And maybe it was hard to make the change because maybe the friends are different because they may not lead the same lifestyle. But honestly, I feel so much more centered. And don't get me wrong, I have many problems to solve, but with myself, but it really, when you make that transition, it's like, wow, this is like true self-care. And so I think it's motivating to stick with it.
It's motivating and it feels good. It's just like, you feel proud of yourself. I think that's it. And not to say that you shouldn't feel proud of yourself if you don't make the food choices that we are recommending right here. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I think if it's right for you and you start to see the positive benefits, regardless of if in my clinic, it's if they got the positive pregnancy test or not, but that they see all these other changes starting to happen and just more grounded and more in their body and just more, like the color of their skin and their hair and their nails and like all these things are changing and they're having healthy bowel movements every day. It's like, oh, wow. So this feels supportive. I feel that, like, people often say to me, I'm sleeping the best I've ever slept in my life. I have more energy now and I'm 45 than I did when I was 35. And, it's like, yeah. And that's then why you do it. It becomes the thing. And then sure, like just like you, like then I have my cheats and I know what I'm setting myself up for. And sometimes that's okay. But I also know that I can recover, it's not like a downward spiral. It's just, okay, I'm going to have that pizza because it looks really good. And tomorrow I'll be constipated and that's okay.
Well, thank you for sharing that too, because we certainly don't want people to think, do what's in the book, never make another change again, and good luck.
No, I want you to live your life, but I also think you all deserve to be empowered, and to know that a lot of this is in your hands, and you can make some big changes in your life and in your health, even if you were told you can't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's such an important takeaway, and so inspiring. So speaking of inspiration, let's end with what inspires you to keep going? I mean, you've made such an impact already. The books you've written are often ahead of the time. And, now you have a son, which I know adds to your plate and so many things going on, but you keep going with all these amazing things that you're doing for patients. And I know I'm grateful for it and we all are. So what keeps you going?
I mean, you make me cry. You guys keep me going. The desire to know more and learn more. And, I have a beautiful job. I help women become moms. But I think it's so much more than that. It's really helping them become the best versions of themselves. And that's, it's phenomenal to witness. So, that's it. And the stories keep me going. It's like how you've got to me, that like some woman is at, this incredible man's funeral and is talking about, the change the impact that I had. I mean, that's it right there. Keeps you going.
Well, on the days where it's hard, because I know I can attest as well, being a mom is really hard. And it's always that battle of, doing the things you're passionate about where your kid is also your passion. Just want to say thank you for doing what you do, and it keeps inspiring us all, and keep at it. And we look forward to the next chapter of all the other information you'll be sharing. And I look forward to continuing to work with you because I always love connecting with you, Aimee.
And you keep up the good work too. You're doing amazing work. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aimee. Take good care. Say hi to your little one. I know he wants to see you. Bye. Thank you for joining me today on Fempower Health. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please follow me on social media. I am most active on Instagram, LinkedIn, as well as TikTok. You can also subscribe to the weekly newsletter if you want to stay off social media to get the latest and greatest updates. And you can find the link to that either on my website, fempower-health.com, which is a hub to all the different health topics I've covered over the past 5 years, or you can go to the show notes where there's links to all the helpful resources that are relevant to this discussion. And if you know of someone in your life who would benefit from this information, please do pass this along, because that is how we can ensure this important information reaches those who need it most. And for anything that is discussed medically, please understand that none of what we share on Fempower Health is medical advice. It is all for information purposes only, and only a conversation between you and your doctor can give you the care that you need. Thank you very much.